Y'all, it is a little gloomy outside, but it is a wonderful Lord's Day. And we have a special guest, our own Marie Agee. Normally, we're concerned because the spouse of the speaker, like it's a guy, and the wife sometimes has a little problem coming. Today, Marie's speaking. Where is Carl?
In Portland, Oregon.
Okay, all right. Well, that's reasonable. Okay. Marie was born. She was born as a Yankee, but up from Tennessee parents. She was born in Wyandotte, or that's phonetic pronunciation, Michigan. Okay, but quickly moved back to Tennessee. And after graduating from high school, she met Carl. But it was a strange kind of thing because Carl was preaching every other Sunday as he was going to college. Now, everybody that knows Carl would say, really? Okay, but Carl's aunt invited Carl to eat lunch one day. And Marie was nowhere around, but her picture was in the house. And Carl fell in love instantly and then was able to convince the talented, the beautiful, the shy and retiring, and the saintly Marie to marry him. And of course, she goes by Marie Agee now. Then in 1974, Marie got involved with Health Talents. She has been the director for over 20 years. It has been a very successful relationship. Marie and Carl have 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and Marie is a published author. Mud on Your Own Boots. It has something to do with Health Talents, but I really think it's a romance novel. Please help me welcome our own Marie Agee. Excellent. All right, let me shake your hand.
Very carefully.
Okay, there you go. Let me shake your hand.
Oh.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you. All right. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Please let me know if you can't hear me. I have a soft voice, and if this goes out, I might as well stop because there's no point in going further. Thank you, Russ, for inviting me here to speak today. It was really more like badgering, but I am here, and I'm glad to do it. And I really appreciate your class, Russ, because the format serves the purpose of not only giving us encouraging words from various members of the church from week to week, but we learn more about each other. And in a church this large, that is so important to learn about the people that you share pews with Sunday after Sunday after Sunday. A church is supposed to be a family, and most of the time you don't know who in the world it is sitting down the pew from you. So I appreciate this class, and I'm glad to do my part. The title of my talk today comes from you'll also be happy to know.
I'm just going to move this down. I couldn't see your pretty face.
Thank you. Okay. All right. I was going to tell you you should be glad I brought notes because I could talk for 7 hours. So I'm trying to contain myself because I have lived this stuff, so it's fun. But the title of the talk today is "Don't Let the Story End with You." And the title came from a sermon that the McBrides and Carl and I heard in Kentucky just a couple of weeks ago when we went up there to visit some friends, and we went to this Baptist church. The preacher of that Baptist church was a young minister, about like Carl, preaching every other Sunday. He was young and fresh and all excited about life. But his lesson that morning was about Ruth and how the decision she made to go with Naomi rather than go back to her homeland impacted our history from that point in time. That one decision she made put her on a rolling path that she could never, ever have predicted. From marrying Boaz to becoming the great-grandmother to King David, to ultimately producing Joseph, the husband of Mary, to the birth of Christ. That one decision of hers set her on a path to bring the story of Jesus to us. The bones of my talk comes from my own personal experience. In 1974 or 75, Carl and I had been going to Homewood. We had just switched to start going to church at Cahaba Valley. And I was a young mother, and the children were small. I think Joanna was about 4, and David must have been about 6 or 7. And I was walking out of church one Sunday, holding on to him so they wouldn't run off. And Charles Bates stopped me. Some of you may know Charles Bates. He used to go here. But he stopped me and asked me if I would help him with a new mission effort that he had gotten involved with. And it was called Health Talents. And he said, he promised me that all he needed me to do was type a letter once in a while. And so he promised that that's all it was. Well, I had heard about Health Talents just peripherally. I knew it was a medical missions ministry, but I didn't really know anything about it. But my main goal in that time period was to be a stay-at-home mom. I wanted more than anything else to be able to stay home with my children and still eat regularly. So I agreed to yes. I could be envisioning earning $50 extra a month. That might buy coffee or something to keep me going. So very soon, though, my kitchen table became my office as I quickly went from writing a letter once in a while to being totally immersed in the building of a new medical clinic in the Petén in Guatemala. I bought plane tickets for missionaries. I fielded questions from prospective supporters and church leaders from all over the country, and I ended up managing the financial records. That one three-little word yes changed my life, because the next thing I knew, in only 5 short years, Carl and I and the children were on a plane going to Guatemala for the dedication of that new clinic. This is where we see if this works. Whoops. There, that's the clinic. And that's the best picture I have of it. It was not complete at that time. When we went down there, it was complete. But Charles had told me the reason we went was Charles had told me that I would never, ever understand what Health Talents was all about unless I got mud on my own boots. And even then, when he said those words, I thought, man, that'd be a great title of a book. So years later, when the board asked me to write the history of Health Talents, I pulled that out of my mind. He got it. But boy, am I glad that I went, because I did get mud on my boots, and they got very muddy. But this was also the very beginning of my understanding of not only Health Talents, but who God is and what he wants from us. Leave that out of the way. It might make it easier. But God wasn't through opening doors for me yet, because in 1989, the HTI Board of Directors asked me to be the full-time stateside coordinator. So up to that point, it was 14 years I was working off my kitchen table doing part-time work. But we'd grown enough that they needed a full-time person, so they asked me to do it. Well, Carl and I struggled with that decision, because that was very different from committing to typing a letter once in a while. Number one, it would involve a great deal of traveling, both stateside and internationally. Number two, I didn't have any experience in anything like that whatsoever. And number three, and most importantly, was I wasn't aware of any organization in the Church of Christ at that time that had the face of a woman as its public face. So those were very powerful considerations for us to make, but we talked about it and prayed about it and everything. We finally decided that we would accept the challenge and do it. And I also realized and had to acknowledge that I had been given my dream of being a stay-at-home mom, because my youngest child was graduating from high school. In fact, she graduated on a Thursday night, and Friday I flew out of town on my first business trip with Health Talents. So a lot of prayer. After working through some prayer and what-ifs, we did decide to accept the challenge and walk through the door that God had clearly opened. At that point, my world and my faith grew exponentially as I walked through the path he offered me. Now, I had spent my entire life in church, but I can honestly say that I never felt God's presence in my life as much as I did when I accepted this challenge. And on the one hand, I thought, isn't that a shame? But on the other hand, I don't think I'm alone in that, because sometimes it takes stripping away all the trappings of things we're comfortable with and stepping out and being in situations where you really don't have any control, like Brett was talking about this morning, to really realize the role that God plays in our life and the comfort and the protection he will give you. So this morning, I'm going to share some photographs with you. Russ told me I had only 20 minutes, so I have to talk fast, and I tried to narrow it down to some of my favorite stories. But I'm going to share some of these stories with you and hope that it encourages you to take a risk for God that you might otherwise be willing to take. I hope to convey to you a few of the things that I've gained. They include being alert to the voice of God in my life, learning to trust him to be with me as he took me places I never dreamed I would ever go. And number three, be consciously grateful for all he does for us every day of our lives that we most of the time are not even aware of or don't pay any attention to. Okay, number one, mountaintop experience. Whoops, This picture is where I have to tell you a little background before you do this, in case you don't recognize me, because I'm 30 years younger and many pounds lighter, the second on the left, next to the older woman. Now I'm the older woman. What? No. Probably worn down now. Okay, we did open the clinic in 1980, as I briefly mentioned earlier. For a year and a half, the clinic that we had was a fully functioning clinic. It was in the northern part of Guatemala, which is an equivalent, at the time, the culture was equivalent to the Wild West 150 years ago in this country. There were no public services, no electricity to amount to anything. In fact, the clinic had the only flush toilet that I'm aware of in the entire town of Las Cruces. And because Carl had developed diarrhea right after we arrived, we got to stay at the clinic, so that was good. But anyway, the Civil War had been raging. It had begun in Guatemala, in the southern part of Guatemala, but a year and a half later, it spread to the Petén, and it became very dangerous very quickly. And there were rumors that the guerrillas were going to kidnap some of our medical staff and to hold them in their camps to help their soldiers who got hurt. So the team had to evacuate. Well, the community was just devastated because they were the only medical care at all in the whole community. So for 2 years, the mayor of Las Cruces, which was the name of the community the clinic was in, kept contacting Roger McCowan in Austin, Texas, saying, please come back. Roger was the director of the clinic at the time that speaks fluent Spanish. But they kept saying, please come back, please come back. We don't have anybody to help us, but you guys, please, if you come back, we promise we won't let anybody hurt you. So after 2 years, the board decided that things had settled down a little bit. Some of the worst of it was over. We'd gotten secondhand reports. So they decided to send a medical team down to sort of a survey team to gauge for ourselves how safe it was and whether or not it was safe to reopen the clinic. And it was one of those times when you feel totally helpless. The board looked at me and said, Marie, will you put a team together and lead it to go down there? And, you know, I looked at him, I thought, I've never even been on a medical clinic team, you know, I didn't know anything about it, but we figured it out, and the Lord was faithful, and that was the team that we took with us. The plan initially was that we would go and stay for 2 weeks, and this team was going to stay 1 week. I was going to stay both weeks, but that team was going to stay 1 week, and another team was coming in. Well, the patient load was so great, we used up all of our medicines in 1 week. So we ended up coming home after just 1 week. But I had to tell you that in order to tell you the mountaintop experience. This is what I'm getting to now. The first day we got there, we arrived at clinic after we flew into Guatemala City and then had to fly up to Las Cruces on a DC-3, those planes that sit like that on the runway, and you have to walk uphill to get off the plane. And we got on a bus and drove 20 miles to the clinic. When we drove up to the clinic, the first thing we saw were about a dozen men from the village standing around with big old guns around their neck. They weren't AK-47s, but they were more than a .22 rifle. And we were all like, what in this world? Well, it turns out the mayor had sent them to protect us. So after we got over our initial shock and we noticed that they positioned themselves around the perimeter of the clinic to make sure we were safe. And I could tell you more stories about that. I wish I had time. But it was pretty scary right at first. But we went ahead and we got in, we got set up, and we started seeing patients. And there was just a crowd of patients that day, so we didn't have any electricity. We hired a cook for us to cook during the day on a wood stove, but when it got dark, she went home so she could get home before dark, and she just left the food in the kitchen. So when we got through work, we all went in there with a flashlight and our plate and our fork and managed to get some food. And the only dining area we had was a concrete pad outside that was a patient waiting area and just had wooden benches around it. And there were only a dozen of us. The team wasn't that large, as you see. So we all sat around those benches and ate our supper and then started reflecting on the day and different patients we had seen and things that might have impacted us. And all of a sudden, I mean, just suddenly as a natural thing, somebody started singing. So we sang a couple of songs sitting there on the benches. And then somebody suggests we conclude by singing Anywhere with Jesus I Can Safely Go. So we stood up, we joined hands in a circle, and we started singing. And the only light we had, aside from the heavens above, was one little 6-inch pillar candle that was burning. That was our only light. But we stood up and we held hands and we started singing Anywhere with Jesus I Can Safely Go, which in that setting really meant a great deal at the time. But it got better. because as we were singing about halfway through the first verse, we all started looking around because we heard voices singing with us. And it was the guards were singing with us in Spanish, and they had positioned themselves around our circle. So, and they moved in close to, they were like 6 feet behind us. So we dropped hands and expanded our circle to include them, and we sang with the soldiers with the guns hanging on their neck. Anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. And I can tell you, I can't sing that song today without choking up because it was so powerful at the time. God was so faithful. All right, my second story has to do with, I'll show you this first. Wait, I'm getting all my devices mixed up. Just to show you how primitive it was, these were two of the nurses that lived down there. That was their house that they lived in. I'm missing a very important piece here. Here we go. All right, the next one. This is not the woman I'm going to tell you about. I couldn't find the picture of the woman I wanted to tell you about. But the next story is just a tender, touching story, mother to mother, two women who couldn't speak to each other, but we had a loving exchange, a very loving exchange. We were doing one of our very first clinics in Guatemala City. You have to understand that the Mayan Indians are at the bottom of the social scale in Guatemala, absolutely bottom. You know, it's just despicable the way they've been treated through the years. Things are a little better now, but not much better. But this mother was, and we were setting up for the clinic. It was our first day. Nobody knew anything about us. So the crowd was slow to gather. And while they were setting up inside, I noticed this young mother, Mayan mother, dressed in a corte, they call it, in a huipil. It's a really beautifully embroidered blouse, very much like she's wearing. But the mother I saw had 3 children that were toddlers. The oldest looked to be about 5, plus a baby on her back. She had no teeth. She was dirty, and she was barefoot, but she was standing there with her children. Well, not being a medical person, you know, most of my work is before we get to clinic, and then once we get there, I just help where I can. But I had brought some Bible story pages to work with the children, so I went outside and sat down with those 3 little children and had crayons and Bible story things, and I couldn't talk to them. They spoke Quiche, and I spoke none, and so I just colored with the children. They were so excited. They colored their pages and finish one and run and take it to their mom. And they'd come back and get another one and color another one. So we did that for a while until her number was called. She went to see the doctor, and I forgot about her. Late that afternoon, she showed up again, and I saw her, and I thought, I wonder why she's back. She didn't have the children with her this time. She was by herself. But I could see her looking around, and when she spotted me, she made a beeline to me, and she gave me this. Weaving is a big thing. It's just a simple little cloth that she wove. But she brought it to me to say thank you for being nice to her children. And I thought, you know, I have kept this forever, and I have her picture somewhere, and I could not put my hands on it. I wish I had. But it was just a moment that when you do things out of love, love is returned. Even though we couldn't say a word, she brought me something. She had probably spent several hours making this, but she brought it to me, and I treasure it as one of my favorite things. Okay, the next one is, these are just very simple. This is a little boy named Mikael. We would say Michael, but they pronounce it Mikael. Health Talents has a child sponsorship program where you can sponsor a child. They're not orphans, but they're Mayan children for the most part who are desperately poor and may not even be able to afford to go to school. And so it used to be, it started out $20 a month or $25 a month. You could support one. Well, I started supporting Mikael many, many years ago, and my sister supported his sister. Well, and when they have to be in school to be in the program, and Mayan children a lot of times, even with the program, would drop out of school very early, and he made it through 8th grade, I think. So once he dropped out of school, he lives in a mountain village called, he dropped out of the program, so I didn't see him very often after that. But every year while I was sponsoring him, when I would be at the clinic, they would find out about it. He and his mother would come and bring him and his sister to visit with me and bring me a little gift or something. Well, I hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 years, and he showed up at the clinic one of the last times I was there. There he is with his wife. His mother's on the right. His wife is in the turquoise shirt, and he had a new baby. And they brought me the gift of the corte and the huipil that I'm wearing right there. But he wanted to show me his baby. It was the sweetest thing. But he married when he was 17, which is very typical in that culture. But that's just a sweet little story. And I don't have time to talk about medical care, but for those of us who've had knee replacement or need replacement, you sympathize with that picture. That was actually a patient we had. The Mayan men wear skirts a lot, so it was obvious that you can see when they have a problem. Okay, how are we doing on time? I may make it. Okay. The next story, I have two more stories. The next story is about a woman in Belize, and it's a quick one. In 1986, Health Talents was in Belize for 5 years, and they were working in Belize then. And we recruited lots of different churches to come down and teach Vacation Bible School for a week. Belize is English speaking, and language is not an issue. So our church at Cahaba Valley organized a team, and the McBride's son was part of that team, I remember, and we went down to teach Vacation Bible School. And one thing we always preached with the kids was safety. Don't go off by yourself. You know, it's a very poor community, dirt roads and very little, I mean, we call them a one-wire town. You can see the one electrical wire going to you know these Kim. Kim's was one of our students in Guatemala. But one day, I ended up walking a lot by myself, having to go get stuff. And one day I was walking down the road going back to the church with something we had forgotten to bring. And this woman stopped me in her yard, and she was very friendly, and so we chatted for a minute, and she asked me if I had any children, and I told her yes, I had 2, and so I asked her if she had any, and she said, yes, I do. I actually had 6, but I only have 3 now. And she wasn't an old woman. She was older than I was at the time, but not that much older. And I said, oh my goodness, what happened? Well, she proceeded to tell me. The first one died as an infant, had some respiratory thing. Second one was a toddler who died, again, something like that, pneumonia or something. Pneumonia is the leading cause of death. And the third one was the one that really got me. It was a 12-year-old boy. He had died 3 months before because he fell in the street and scraped his knee badly and evidently got a staph infection and died because there was no medical care in the village, no antibiotics for it. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story was her attitude. She followed that up quickly with saying, but you know, I said 3 for you, Lord, and 3 for me. Excuse me. And I'm not sure that I would be capable of having that much faith still if I had lost 3 of the children that I had born. So she's another one I never forget. All right, on to this one. This is a Mayan priest. This is a wonderful story, too. In the Mayan religion, the Mayan culture, which is still practiced today, by the way, it's a pagan culture. They do a lot of incense. They do a lot of sacrifice. And it's very much not Christian. When the Catholics came in the 1500s, I start saying 1900s, the 1500s, they forced them all to convert, as many as they could, to convert to Catholicism or die. And so many of them died rather than convert, but a lot of those who converted practice today still what they call folk Catholicism, where they could just change the name of the gods they were already worshiping and call them, okay, now their name is a Catholic name rather than a Mayan name. But this man was an actual priest. And priests, unlike the Catholic Church, the Mayan priest can marry, and he had a wife and children. And one of his daughters had a little girl about 5 years old, and the little girl got sick. And the Mayan medicine didn't help her. They have a lot of this. The Mayan culture really believes that health, physical health and spiritual health are intertwined, just like in biblical days. It's a wonderful thing which makes our medical evangelism ministry down there very effective, because when you treat somebody physically, it gets their attention spiritually. But her daughter did not get well, so she told her dad she was going to take her little girl to the Christian clinic. And he railed against it, said, no, you can't do that. Well, she did it anyway, and I'm sure the child needed an antibiotic or something, but she got well immediately. And so that got the mother's attention, but the dad was still railing against it. And then sometime later, the woman herself got sick with some bad thing, and so she went to the Christian clinic, which is a health talents clinic. All our clinics, by the way, because of this belief of health, physical and spiritual health, all of our clinics are held in local churches, and local members of that church are at all the clinics that we do. So we're not just outsiders coming in trying to convince people to do something. These are people of their community that they're dealing with. So anyway, after that, the father was even more irate, but he got a little more curious, and he approached what they call the brothers in the local church there and started talking with them about this. And the brothers were being very patient with him and talking and trying to explain about Jesus and God and everything, and he wasn't hearing of it. But they were very patient. A year or two went by, and I don't remember exactly what it was to convince this man, his name is Geronimo, by the way, to convince him that he needed to follow Jesus. But there came a day when one of the brothers asked him, "Aren't you ready to accept Jesus Christ as your Savior?" And he said, "Yes." And there's a picture of him being baptized. And that's one of our most wonderful conversion stories down there. But the glory of it is, it's the brothers in the church down there who do it. It's not a bunch of white North Americans coming down there trying to convert people, and then we leave and just leave them on their own. It's all part of the inbred community. Health Talents works with about 30 different churches. Okay, but that's the end of my stories. But that's a bit of my story, but I probably have 1,000 more like these I could tell if you all had time to sit here. But one of the biggest things I've gained from my experience is the concrete realization that we are all children of God, no matter what color your hair is, what color your skin is, where you come from, what religion you practice. God made every single one of us, and he cares for each one of us. The mothers in Guatemala and Nicaragua want their best for their children, just as you and I do. The fathers work hard in the coffee fields and the cane fields with their machetes to support their families, and Mayan children laugh just as loudly as yours and our grandchildren do. And when the Guatemalan Christians take communion on Sunday morning, it is every bit as meaningful to them as it is to you and I. So now on any given Sunday morning, not only do I take communion in communion with all of you, I take it in communion with all of them because I know they're doing it at the same time. But mostly I've witnessed firsthand God's faithfulness and his promise to be with us always. I felt the warmth of sharing Jesus' love and compassion with others who live lives that are so different and so much harder than the ones we live. I've seen them express deep gratitude to God for even the smallest of blessings, which is just a great reminder for me in my life. And I got to see all of these things, all because Carl and I said yes when we were offered a chance to take a challenge that we didn't know if we could do or not. We didn't know if we were capable of it. We didn't know if we were prepared for what might come. But it's important to say yes because you never know how the story will end. So here's a few more takeaways. I'm almost done. Oh. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Well, I may have to just tell you then. It's gone. I can't. Anyway, that's okay, John. John, I'll just ad-lib it. I don't remember exactly everything I said because I don't have a copy of it here. But the gist of it is that my challenge to you today is have the faith that when God offers you or speaks to you in whatever kind of voice that here, whether you feel it or whether it's an audible thing or whatever, listen and say yes, because you just never know how it will end. The only slide up there that I really wish that I could show you is the clinic today. The clinic today now has 3 operating rooms. We have a surgical clinic. We started doing surgery because the Mayan Indians had no way to get surgery. So we have surgery clinic. We have a huge dental clinic. We have 12 surgical clinics a year where medical professionals in the States come down and give of their time to do the surgery. We have clinics every day of the week that are run mostly by Guatemalans. And we have 3 North Americans total on the staff. That's all out of 50-something employees in the program. And there was something else I was going to say that was very important. Anyway, it'll probably come back. But it's just amazing. How do you pay for it? How do we pay for it? Oh, just like the church pays for everything, contributions. We get some grants, but mostly it's just contributions. The people who staff the clinics are all volunteers, as I said, and we operate now on 800 people a year. That's about our average total for the year. And that takes about 500 to 600 North American medical people to come down and help. And of course, once they go down and see what's going on, they're more than willing to help do things. So it's just made these kinds of things. One of the things I had on the slide that I'm trying to remember exactly how I phrased it, but when you do something for somebody out of the love of God, lives are changed, both yours and theirs. So my message for today is step out. You just don't ever know how it's going to end. And did I end on time? I think I did. That's it. Okay. Thank you.